Let me ask you a question, not to your mind, but to your heart. What if aging is not a problem to be solved, but a path to be honored? In the modern world, growing older is often treated as a slow disappearance, a fading into the background of life. Wrinkles become something to hide. Gray hairs are dyed. Slower steps are mocked. And yet, if you turn to Buddhist teachings, a very different truth is revealed. Aging, in the eyes of the Dharma, is not a curse. It is a sacred invitation, an opportunity to see clearly what truly matters. A reminder that time, like breath, is limited and therefore precious beyond measure. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says, just as a ripe mango falls from the tree, so too does this body age and decay. He spoke not with fear, but with acceptance. In fact, aging was one of the 4 sights that awakened Prince Siddhartha from his royal illusion. He had lived surrounded by youth, beauty, strength, and then, one day, he saw an old man walking, hunched over, shaking. That one encounter cracked open his mind. For the first time, he realized, this too will happen to me. This happens to everyone. Instead of running from that truth, the Buddha turned toward it, and from that moment, his real spiritual journey began. You see, in Buddhism, aging is not the enemy. It is the teacher. While youth celebrates possibility, age invites clarity. In youth, we chase. In age, we begin, if we are wise, to let go. The pace slows, but the inner depth can grow. We are no longer defined by how fast we run, how much we achieve, or how many people praise us. Instead, we are asked, can you be at peace with yourself? Can you sit quietly with your own heart and smile? In the West, many fear becoming invisible after a certain age. But in Buddhist eyes, this invisibility can be a blessing. When no one is watching, the ego has less room to perform. The stage is empty. And in that silence, something extraordinary can occur, the quiet return to who you really are. There's a beautiful image often used in Zen, the old pine tree. It does not bloom like a cherry blossom. It does not stand tall and youthful like a bamboo shoot. It is weathered, knotted, and sometimes even hollow at the center. But because it has endured many winters, it shelters the birds. It survives storms. Its roots run deep, and its wisdom is steady. Aging, then, is like becoming an old pine, no longer flashy, but deeply alive in a different way. This is the gift that awaits you. But like all true gifts, it is not wrapped in ease. It arrives disguised, sometimes as pain in the joints, as memory lapses, as grief for those we've lost. And yet, if you don't reject it, if you simply stay present with what is unfolding, a deeper awareness begins to grow. You may begin to realize that much of your suffering didn't come from aging itself, but from fighting it. The Buddha taught, whatever is subject to arising is also subject to cessation. Your youth arose, and it ceased. Your career, your roles, even your identities, they came and went. But what remains, when everything changes? That is where wisdom lives. And aging, in its most honest moments, forces us to ask that question. When you embrace aging, you are not giving up. You are waking up. You are no longer clinging to the illusion that things will always be the same. Instead, you are choosing to walk hand in hand with impermanence, not as a victim, but as a friend of truth. Let this chapter of your life not be about regret. Let it be about depth. Let it be about presence. Let it be about love, not the romantic kind, but the kind that sees, accepts, and holds everything just as it is. You do not need to chase youth. You are not behind. You are not late. In fact, you are right on time, and now is the perfect moment to turn inward and begin the richest part of your journey. As we move forward, we will explore 5 Buddhist lessons that can truly reshape how you experience this phase of life. Not just intellectually, but in your bones, your breath, and your being. So take a deep breath, and let's begin. Lesson 1. Impermanence frees the heart. There is a truth so simple, so universal, that the Buddha placed it at the very center of all his teachings. Anicca, impermanence. Everything changes. Everything fades. Everything passes. At first, that may sound bleak, even sad. But in the light of Buddhist wisdom, impermanence is not something to mourn. It is the very doorway to freedom. Let me ask you gently, have you ever suffered because something didn't last? Maybe it was your health, your beauty, a relationship, a job, or even your role in the family. And when it ended, did you cling to it in your mind, replaying moments, trying to make sense of the loss, wishing it could return? That is where most of our pain arises, not in a change itself, but in the resistance to change. Buddha did not promise us a life without endings. Instead, he taught us to look directly into the nature of all things and see, this, too, will pass. Not as a threat, but as a liberation. When you truly understand impermanence, something shifts inside you. You begin to let go of your tight grip on how things should be. You no longer expect your body to behave like it did at 30. You no longer try to freeze time, or preserve your image, or chase after lost dreams. Instead, you begin to live, fully, openly, with what is. Let's pause for a moment. Feel your breath. Inhale. Exhale. Notice how even the breath does not stay. You cannot hold onto it. And yet, it nourishes you when you let it flow. That is the rhythm of impermanence, not cruelty, but wisdom. The more we resist change, the more we suffer. But when we embrace change, the heart softens. The ego loses its sharp edges. And the fear that once ruled us begins to fade. This lesson becomes especially powerful as we age. Every day, the mirror shows us a different face. Muscles weaken. Skin thins. Memory falters. But these are not signs that life is failing you. They are signs that life is moving as it always has, forward, moment by moment. Think of a river. If you tried to freeze it in place, it would no longer be a river. Its beauty lies in its movement. You, too, are a river, not a fixed, solid object, but a living, flowing process. When you understand this, you stop trying to be who you once were, and you start honoring who you are becoming. The Buddha often used the metaphor of footprints in the sand. Just as they are washed away by the tide, so too are our experiences, our thoughts, our possessions, even our sense of self. That which you once clung to, the praise, the power, the youthful energy, all of it will fade. But here's the miracle: when those things fall away, what's left is the present moment. There. Unfiltered. Precious. You see, impermanence is not only about endings, it's also about possibilities. Because nothing lasts forever, you are never trapped. You are never stuck. Even if your body aches, your spirit can still awaken. Even if you've lost people you loved, your heart can still open again. Even if you're 70, 80, or 90, the next breath is still new. Still alive. Still yours. There is an old Zen saying, because we know the cup is already broken, we hold it with more care. That is what aging teaches us. It sharpens our appreciation. It makes small things radiant. a morning breeze, a shared smile, a quiet cup of tea. We no longer take these things for granted because we know they won't last. But instead of grieving that truth, we bow to it. There's freedom in knowing that you don't have to carry everything. You don't have to preserve your past or worry about the future. All you have to do is show up now with presence, with compassion, with openness. So as you grow older, let this be your mantra: everything changes, and that's okay. When sadness comes, it will pass. When joy arrives, it too will pass. And in between those waves, there is you, the quiet observer, the wise presence, the one who sees clearly. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is warmth. It is trust. It is the deep knowing that life is a dance, and you don't need to control the music. Just move with grace while it plays. If you can truly embrace impermanence, aging will not be a burden. It will be a release, a softening, a return to what's real. You are not who you were yesterday, and tomorrow you will not be who you are today. But who you are right now is enough. And that, dear listener, is the first key to embracing aging with wisdom. Lesson 2: Non-attachment to the body. Let me offer you a gentle truth, one that may hurt at first, but will heal at its core. Your body is not who you are. It is where you live, but it is not your home. In the silence of Buddhist meditation halls, monks often contemplate the body, not to glorify it, but to understand it. The Buddha taught us to look at the body not with desire or pride, but with deep clarity. He instructed his disciples to reflect on the body as impermanent, prone to aging, illness, and death, not to scare us, but to free us from identifying with what is always changing. As we age, this teaching becomes more personal. Once, your body may have been strong, agile, quick to recover. Now, it creaks. It slows. It surprises you with new limits. Perhaps you feel betrayed by your knees or frustrated with your memory. Perhaps you look in the mirror and wonder, who is this person I see? But here is what Buddhism whispers gently into your ear. You are not your face. You are not your joints. You are not even your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices them. You are the stillness beneath the change. When we attach our identity to the body, to its youth, beauty, strength, we set ourselves up for sorrow. Because all bodies change. No exception. Not even the Buddha himself avoided aging. In his final years, his steps slowed, his body weakened, and yet his wisdom deepened. He taught until his final breath, showing that liberation does not depend on physical strength, but on spiritual clarity. In the Satipatthana Sutta, one of the Buddha's foundational discourses on mindfulness, he guides us through contemplating the body as elements: earth, water, fire, and air. The skin is like the outer bark of a tree. The bones like ivory branches. The breath like the wind. The body, he says, is a temporary collection of parts, not a permanent self. This may sound abstract, but it brings profound peace. When you no longer identify with your aching back or aging skin, you stop fighting them. You start caring for them, kindly, gently, like you would an old friend, not an enemy. You begin to treat the body not as me, but as a guest house, one that you care for, clean, nourish, and one day, release. In fact, non-attachment to the body does not mean neglecting it. Quite the opposite. It means caring for it without obsession. Feeding it wisely, moving it gently, resting it when needed, but no longer measuring your worth by it. You can wear glasses and be wise. You can walk slowly and still be strong. You can forget names but still remember compassion. Many of the Buddha's enlightened disciples were old. They bore the marks of time, missing teeth, wrinkled skin, sunken eyes. And yet, when they sat in silence, the power of their presence was undeniable. Why? Because their peace did not depend on the body. It flowed from a deeper source, awareness. Let me share with you a small story, often told in Theravada tradition. There was once an elderly monk, known to be very sick. He coughed often, could barely walk, and yet every morning, he would sit and meditate for hours. A young novice once asked him, "Venerable sir, how do you endure the pain?" The old monk smiled and replied, "The pain is in the body. The suffering is only in the mind, if I allow it to take root." This is the heart of the lesson. You may not choose what your body goes through, but you can choose how your mind relates to it. If you attach to the body as me, every wrinkle becomes a threat. Every change becomes a loss. But if you see the body as part of the natural world, like a leaf turning color in autumn, you begin to relax. You begin to love yourself in a new way, not for how you look, but for how you live. And here's a secret. When you stop demanding perfection from your body, you start noticing its quiet miracles again. The breath still flows. The heart still beats. The eyes still see sunlight. The ears still hear birdsong. The hands still hold. The mouth still smiles. These are not small things. These are everyday blessings. And aging helps us remember them. You do not need to look 30 to be beautiful. There is a kind of beauty that only time can bring. The beauty of presence, of patience, of wisdom etched into your face like sacred calligraphy. So please, be gentle with your body. It has carried you for so long. It has endured illness, weathered grief, and brought you to this very moment. It is not your prison, it is your temple. And when the time comes, you can bow to it, thank it, and let it go without fear. Because who you are is not the body that bends, but the awareness that bows. Lesson 3. Presence is the real youth. There is a kind of youth that no wrinkle can erase. A radiance that doesn't depend on smooth skin or fast feet. A timeless vitality that flows not from your body, but from your awareness. In the eyes of Buddhist wisdom, this is the kind of youth that truly matters, the youth of presence. Presence is not about being young in age. It's about being alive in the moment. Think of a child seeing rain for the first time. The wonder, the delight, the curiosity. They are not thinking about yesterday or worrying about tomorrow. They are fully here. That same aliveness is still available to you, right now, even at 60, 70, or 90. Not by trying to act younger, but by becoming more awake. In fact, one of the great ironies of life is that as our bodies age, our minds have a greater potential to become still, observant, clear. In youth, we are often too distracted, too restless, too hungry for experience. But in aging, we are given a gift, the slowing down of life space. This gives us more chances to notice, to feel, to be. Presence is the doorway to peace. It is also the secret to joy. The Buddha called it appamada, heedfulness, or full attentiveness. And he declared it the very heart of the spiritual path. But what does presence really mean? It means sitting with your cup of tea and actually tasting it. It means listening to a loved one without mentally rehearsing a reply. It means watching the sunset, not through the lens of your phone, but through the lens of your soul. And perhaps most importantly, it means not letting your mind drag you into stories of regret or fear. Regret says, "If only I had." Fear says, What if I can't? Presence says, just this, now. When we are present, we drop the weight of identity. We are not trapped in the roles we used to play, the parent, the provider, the achiever. We become simpler, freer, more real. And in this spaciousness, a lightness returns, a sense of wonder, even laughter. You may start to find joy in the smallest things again, the feel of warm socks, the rhythm of your breath, the quiet companionship of a tree outside your window. Many elders, especially those who've practiced mindfulness for years, speak of a peculiar thing. They feel younger now than they did in their 30s. Not because their bodies are stronger, they are not, but because their minds are lighter. They no longer carry the need to impress, to chase, to prove. They have returned to themselves. Let me tell you a story from the Zen tradition. A young man approached an old monk and asked, "Master, how do you stay so peaceful, so youthful in spirit?" The monk replied, "When I walk, I walk. When I eat, I eat. When I sleep, I sleep." The young man frowned. "But Master, don't we all do that?" The monk smiled. "No. When you walk, your mind is already running. When you eat, you are thinking. When you sleep, you dream of tomorrow. I simply am." This is the wisdom of presence. It is deceptively simple, and yet it takes a lifetime to truly live it. For those of us who are aging, presence is not just a practice, it's medicine. It soothes anxiety. It quiets regrets. It opens your senses. And it reconnects you to what is still here, still beautiful, still worth loving. You might say, "But my mind is not as sharp as before." That's okay. Presence is not about memory. It's not about solving problems or remembering names. It's about feeling the moment you're in, exactly as it is. Even if the mind becomes forgetful, the heart can still be wise. Even if words escape you, your gaze can still hold kindness. Even if you forget the teachings, the breath can still lead you home. This is why so many Buddhist practices return to one thing, the breath. The breath is always now. It does not exist in the past or the future. It reminds us that life is not something that happened or might happen, but something unfolding now, right under your nose. So if you want to feel young again, don't chase the past. Return to the present. Be curious again. Be grateful again. Be simple again. Because in the eyes of Dharma, the most youthful person is not the one with perfect skin, but the one with an open mind, a soft heart, and a spirit rooted in presence. And you, just by being here, just by listening deeply, are already walking that path. So let us continue, not in a rush, but in awareness, toward the next truth that deepens with time, compassion. Lesson 4. Compassion deepens with time. There is a softness that comes with age, not just in the skin, but in the heart. A gentleness that isn't weakness, but wisdom. And that wisdom is compassion. In the early years of life, so much is about becoming successful, admired, attractive, strong. But as we grow older, the question shifts. It's no longer, how do I become someone, but how do I connect with others more deeply, more kindly, more truly? This shift is the blooming of compassion. In Buddhist teachings, compassion is not pity. It is not about feeling sorry for others. It is the profound recognition that we all suffer, and the sincere wish that no one has to suffer alone. As we age, we've seen more suffering in ourselves, in those we love, and in the world. We've lived through loss, illness, disappointment, and change. And through that, if we are awake, our hearts become more tender, not in sentimentality, but in strength. The Buddha himself embodied this perfectly. Though he was revered as enlightened, he never distanced himself from the suffering of others. He walked among the sick. He listened to the grieving. He comforted the brokenhearted. Why? Because wisdom without compassion is dry. It is through compassion that wisdom takes root in the world. An age ripens that compassion like a fruit left long in the sun. You no longer need to prove you are right. You begin to understand why people act the way they do. You've seen enough of human frailty to know we are all trying our best, even when we fail. One of the great gifts of aging is this deeper seeing, the ability to look beyond behavior and glimpse the wound beneath it. Someone snaps at you. Perhaps they are lonely. Someone forgets to call. Perhaps they are overwhelmed. And even when others do not offer you the same patience, you begin to offer it anyway, not because they deserve it, but because you are becoming free. There is an old saying in the Mahayana tradition, a bodhisattva weeps, but her tears water the seeds of peace. What this means is that our pain, when held in mindfulness, becomes the very ground from which compassion grows. If you've suffered, you can understand others who suffer. If you've felt lost, you can sit beside those who are searching. You no longer need to fix them. You simply need to be with them, and that is a sacred act. In this way, aging becomes less about collecting memories and more about becoming a refuge. You begin to radiate steadiness. You speak with fewer words, but more meaning. You walk a little slower, but others slow down just to walk beside you. You are no longer chasing love. You are becoming love. I once heard a Zen teacher say, in your youth, you want to be admired. In old age, you want to be kind. That kindness is not weakness. It is clarity. The clarity that says, it's not about winning arguments. It's about easing suffering. It's not about being important. It's about being present. Even the way we listen changes. In our youth, we often listen to reply. In our later years, we begin to listen just to hear. To let someone feel seen. This is not a small thing. In this world of noise and distraction, a listening heart is a rare and precious gift. If you've raised children, you know what it means to care without expecting anything in return. If you've lost someone, you know what it means to cherish every moment. If you've grown older, you know what it means to forgive, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. All of these are forms of compassion. In Buddhism, Karu, compassion, is paired with wisdom like two wings of a bird. Without one, you cannot fly. And often, it is aging that helps us grow that second wing. The years teach us to soften. The losses teach us to appreciate. The disappointments teach us humility. And all of it teaches us that life is not a competition, but a shared experience. You begin to smile at strangers. You begin to speak more gently. You begin to feel the pain of others without being crushed by it, because now, you've learned how to sit with pain and not run away. You've learned how to hold space. So, dear one, if you are aging, do not hide your tenderness. It is your strength. Your wisdom now is not just what you know, it is how you love. Not with fireworks, but with the quiet glow of a lamp that stays lit through the night. And in this light, others will find their way home. Let us now take the next step on this journey, perhaps the most difficult and most beautiful of all, preparing for death, not as an end, but as the ultimate peace. Lesson 5. Preparing for death is preparing for peace. What if I told you, death is not something to fear, but something to understand? This may sound unsettling, but in Buddhism, the contemplation of death is not morbid. It is sacred. It is called mindfulness of death. And it is not meant to bring dread, but to awaken a deep, liberating truth. Nothing is guaranteed, except that we will one day let go. And that's not bad news. In fact, for the awakened heart, that's very good news. Because once you realize that death is certain, and its time uncertain, your life takes on a new clarity. Suddenly, small annoyances fall away. Grudges seem foolish. Every moment becomes more luminous. Every breath, a miracle. This is why the Buddha encouraged his monks to reflect on death every day. Not to become depressed, but to live more fully, more freely, more fearlessly. You see, death is not the opposite of life. It is the opposite of birth. Life is what flows between. And when you meet death with mindfulness, not resistance, you begin to live in a deeper, more peaceful way. Aging, then, is not a countdown. It is a preparation. A soft ascent into surrender. As our bodies change, as energy shifts, we are slowly being invited to loosen our grip. We let go of roles, no longer the provider, the busy planner, the caretaker of everyone. We let go of identities, not who I was, but who I am now. We even begin to let go of possessions, of control, of future plans. And one day, we let go of the breath itself. But here is the quiet miracle. Every time you let go, you become lighter. In Buddhism, this process is not seen as a tragedy. It is the natural flow of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. But if you walk it with wisdom, death becomes not an end, but a return to the stream, to the source, to the stillness from which all things arise. You are not dying. You are transforming. Let me share with you a teaching from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It describes death not as a fall into darkness, but as the dissolution of the elements. First, the earth element phase, the body becomes heavy. Then water, the mouth dries. Then fire, warmth leaves the skin. Then air, the breath becomes shallow. And finally, consciousness itself withdraws, like a flame flickering out. But in that final moment, if one is mindful, there is a gap, a doorway, a moment of pure clarity. And if met with awareness, it becomes a path to liberation. This is why preparing for death in Buddhism is not about obsessing over it. It's about living in such a way that when death comes, you have nothing to regret. No unspoken forgiveness. No withheld love. No unappreciated sunrise. When you live each day as if it may be your last, not in fear, but in reverence, then you are already preparing, gently, wisely, lovingly. And when the time comes to go, you can go not grasping, but bowing. One of the most touching teachings comes from the Buddha's own passing. As he lay on his side beneath the sal trees, he gave his final words: all compounded things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence. He did not cling to life. He did not fear the end. He simply continued the path, all the way to silence. To prepare for death is not to obsess about dying. It is to make peace with living. It is to forgive yourself, to forgive others, to sit quietly and say, yes, this life was mine, and I lived it with presence. You don't have to believe in rebirth to benefit from this teaching. You simply have to ask, if I had only 1 year left, how would I live? And then, live that way. Let go of pettiness. Love more. Speak gently. Laugh without shame. Meditate. Walk barefoot. Call someone you've lost touch with. Write your story. Share your blessings. Sit in the sun and do nothing, and know that doing nothing is enough. When you prepare for death with awareness, you are no longer afraid of it, because you've already begun the practice of letting go. And that, dear friend, is peace. Not a future peace, a present one. So let's walk forward now, not into endings, but into the next layer of truth, letting go of who you used to be. There's a quiet grief that often lives beneath aging, and it's not just about the body. It's about identity. Who you used to be. What you used to do. How the world used to see you. And perhaps even more tender, how you used to see yourself. There was a time when you felt indispensable, at work, at home, in society. A time when you were admired for your strength, relied upon for your decisions, maybe even envied for your looks or success. And now, people don't ask for your opinion as much. Strangers call you sir or ma'am with that tone reserved for the elderly. You walk into a room, and sometimes, you feel invisible. This is not something people talk about often, but it's real. It's the quiet ache of losing who you used to be. But in Buddhism, this letting go is not a failure. It's a spiritual unfolding. The Buddha taught that all suffering comes from clinging, and this includes clinging to self-images. The me that was youthful. The me that was important. The me that had control. But here's the truth, those versions of you were never permanent. They were never fixed. They were roles, costumes, and now, life is asking you to gently take them off. Because the deeper truth is this, you were never those roles. You were the awareness behind them. This is why aging is such a powerful practice in Buddhism. It strips away the masks. Not cruelly, but compassionately, like a sculptor removing the outer layers of stone to reveal what's essential. You are not just someone's parent. Not just a former teacher or nurse or soldier or business owner. You are still becoming. Still evolving. Still discovering parts of yourself that were hidden beneath all the doing. But to find them, you must release the weight of who you were. There's a story of a monk who once carried a beautiful bowl for many years. It was handmade, gifted by a great teacher. One day, it cracked. Others urged him to repair it. But the monk smiled and said, "The bowl served its time. Now it becomes a memory, not a burden. That bowl is your former self. Beautiful, valuable, but no longer needed in its original form. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to be less busy. You are allowed to be quiet, contemplative, unseen, and still valuable beyond measure. In fact, when you let go of who you used to be, something sacred happens. You begin to notice who you are now. Perhaps you are softer, slower, more forgiving, less reactive. Maybe you spent more time in nature. Maybe silence speaks to you in ways noise never did. Maybe your company is enough for yourself. That is not a loss. That is a transformation. In Buddhist tradition, the self is never a solid thing. It is a process, like a flame flickering, like clouds passing through the sky. The person you were at 20, 40, 60, they are all echoes. The only you that is real is this breath, this awareness, this moment. So if the world no longer mirrors back the person you used to be, that's okay. Look into your own heart instead. There, you will find a deeper reflection. One that does not depend on youth or status or praise. Letting go of who you used to be is not giving up. It is returning. Returning to a version of you that is quieter, but wiser. Less admired, but more at peace. Less busy, but more awake. You are not behind. You are not fading. You are peeling back the layers. And beneath all of it is something timeless. Something that was always there, but is finally being seen. So thank the past. Bless the roles you once played. Smile at the memories. And then, step fully into now. Because the present version of you, this humble, honest, withered, radiant version, is the one the world needs most. Let us now turn toward the heart of our practice, seeing aging not as decline, but as a spiritual path in itself. What if growing old is not just a biological process, but a form of meditation? Not a punishment, not a loss, but a sacred path, a silent teacher, an inner retreat. In the Buddhist tradition, aging is not something to be escaped or denied. It is something to be entered. Mindfully. Deliberately. With eyes open and heart soft. Because aging, when seen clearly, is not separate from the path. It is the path. You see, most people think spiritual practice only happens in temples or meditation halls. But the Dharma is not confined to rituals or robes. It lives in the details of your everyday experience, and nowhere is that more obvious than in the aging body. When you get out of bed slowly because your knees ache, that's a moment to practice patience. When you forget something mid-sentence, that's a moment to practice compassion toward yourself. When you lose someone dear, that's a moment to practice non-attachment and tender presence with grief. These are not obstacles. These are invitations. Each one saying, "Come closer. Pay attention. Breathe." This, too, is sacred. Monks and nuns shave their heads not only as a symbol of renunciation, but also to remind themselves, the body is impermanent, and identity is fluid. But in a similar way, wrinkles, gray hair, slower steps, all of these can become symbols of a deeper letting go. They remind you, "I am not this body." They whisper, "Life is precious, fleeting, beautiful in its passing." You don't need a cushion to meditate. You don't need incense or chants. Your life itself is the temple. Your breath is the prayer. Your willingness to stay present, even in discomfort, is the deepest offering. There's a saying in Zen, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. But for those in the later chapters of life, the rhythm becomes even more intimate. Before awakening, take your pills, fold the laundry, rest your bones. After awakening, still the same. Nothing grand, but everything meaningful. And the beauty of spiritual aging is this: you have less to prove, less to defend, less to chase. What's left is space for reflection, for presence, for love that expects nothing in return. In many Buddhist stories, the wisest teachers are not the young prodigies, but the elders who've sat through many winters. They know the seasons of the heart. They've seen loss, illness, failure, and they've come through with a kind of light that doesn't glare, it glows. You are becoming that light. Each moment of aging is a bell of mindfulness. Each physical limit is a Dharma gate. Each forgotten word is a koan, a mystery, asking not to be solved, but held. So when you find yourself feeling useless or left behind, pause. Breathe it. Look again. You are not useless. You are ripening. You are no longer a seed fighting to sprout. You are the full tree, offering shade, offering silence, offering fruit. And if no one sees you, you can see you. The sacredness of your presence, the depth of your gaze, the kindness in your tone. These are not accidents. They are the result of a life lived and felt deeply. So treat your aging as you would a sacred text, one where every line matters. Every day, another verse. Every scar, a stanza. Every breath, a line of poetry written in silence. Aging is not a decline. It is a pilgrimage, not to a place, but to a presence. Not to answers, but to peace. You are walking this path beautifully. And ahead of us, we'll find inspiration not just in theory, but in the lived experience of those who've aged with grace before us. The elders, the monks, the quiet sages who show us what is possible. Wisdom is not found in theories. It lives in footsteps, in real lives, in those who have walked the path before us, slowly, humbly, and with great depth. In Buddhism, the most powerful teachings are often not given in long sermons, but in the quiet presence of the elders. The ones who've lived through hardship. The ones who've buried their loved ones, lost their health, seen the rise and fall of entire worlds, and yet sit, still, like ancient mountains wrapped in silence. Let me tell you about one such elder. Venerable Ajahn Chah was a beloved Thai forest monk. In his later years, he suffered a stroke that left him paralyzed and unable to speak. For many, this would have been the end of teaching. But not for him. He continued to speak, not through words, but through presence. Students would sit beside his bed and weep quietly, moved by the deep stillness he radiated. Though his body no longer moved, his being communicated the most profound teaching. It is possible to be at peace, even when the body is broken. They called it Dhamma through silence. A teaching deeper than books. A wisdom beyond intellect. A truth felt in the marrow. Another story comes from Sayadaw U Pandita, a Burmese meditation master. In his final years, he would walk slowly through the monastery, leaning on a cane. But his gaze, sharp, kind, unwavering, would pierce through the fog of any student's confusion. Observe the breath, he would say. But more importantly, observe the observer. His students noticed something remarkable. As his physical energy declined, his compassion expanded. He began spending more time just listening, not correcting, not instructing, just being fully there. From him we learn, you don't have to do more to matter more. Sometimes the greatest gift you can offer is your presence, your attention, your being. And then there was Ruth Denison, one of the first Western women authorized to teach Buddhist meditation. In her old age, she lived simply in the Mojave Desert, surrounded by silence and sand. Students would come from all over the world just to sit with her, not because she had something flashy to offer, but because she had become empty enough to hold others fully. She once said, "My body is slow now, sometimes confused. But my awareness, oh, it is white and laughing. It dances." That is spiritual aging. The body may crumble, but the awareness expands. The face may wrinkle, but the heart opens. In these stories, we see a new definition of aging, not as retreat from life, but as ripening into it. Many of these teachers became softer with age. Not weaker, softer. The kind of softness that comes from seeing suffering without flinching. The kind of gentleness that comes from letting go of being impressive and becoming real. They laughed more, cried more, hugged longer, sat in silence without needing to fill it. They were not trying to leave behind a legacy. They were simply living fully, and in doing so, they left a legacy anyway. So what can we learn from these elders? That you don't need to speak loudly to teach. You don't need to move quickly to walk a sacred path. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be awake, right here. They remind us that the final chapters of life can be the most luminous. That dignity and depth are not found in resisting age, but in embracing it. That we can become mirrors, not to our past accomplishments, but to eternal truths. You, too, can become such an elder. Not by achieving more, but by becoming less entangled, less reactive, more spacious, more at peace. Let your life be a teaching. Let your eyes soften. Let your touch be gentle. Let your silence be wise. And if someone asks, "What is your practice now?" you can smile and say, "This breath, this step, this moment, nothing more and nothing less." Let us now gather everything we've explored into one closing truth, that aging is not the end, but a doorway. So here we are, not at the end of a teaching, but at the quiet edge of something profound. After everything we've walked through, the teachings of impermanence, the letting go of the body, the awakening to presence, the flowering of compassion, and the soft acceptance of death, this final truth unfolds like a petal you didn't know had been waiting to bloom. Aging is not your ending. It is your entry point. Not a shutting down, but a doorway to a richer, more honest, more awakened kind of living. The world may tell you that your time is behind you. But Buddhism invites you to see the sacred in every wrinkle, the wisdom in every step, the truth in every breath you still have. You see, most of us spend our lives trying to become someone important, someone admired, someone successful. But now, in this stage of life, you are being invited to do something far more powerful, to stop becoming and start being. Not being what the world wants you to be. Just being, open, awake, simple, unguarded, real. You are not fading. You are returning. Returning to what is essential. Returning to what you were too busy to notice before. The taste of your tea. The sound of birdsong at dawn. The feel of your own breath moving in and out of your chest like a prayer you never had to learn. The truth is, when all the noise quiets, the identity, the performance, the striving, what remains is not emptiness. It's space. Space for love, for wisdom, for inner peace. Space to see not only the world as it is, but yourself as you really are. The Buddha never promised that life would be free from aging or decay. In fact, one of the first great awakenings he had was when he saw an old man, bent and trembling, and realized for the first time that even he, a prince, could not escape the truth of impermanence. But instead of despairing, he turned that moment into a doorway, a call to go deeper. To see aging not as a collapse, but as a path to clarity. You are walking that same path now. With each year that passes, with each attachment you release, you come closer not to an end, but to an essence. So if there are days you feel invisible, forgotten, or slow, remember, in the Dharma, the elders are never cast aside. They are the ones who hold the lamp, who've walked through the storms and now sit beneath the Bodhi tree of experience, rooted, steady, and filled with knowing that only time can give. Your value now is not in what you do. It is in who you are, or more precisely, in how much you've let go of everything you thought you were. Perhaps the greatest secret of aging is this: the more you release, the more whole you become. You don't need the past to validate your worth. You don't need the future to prove your purpose. You just need this moment, simple, sacred, complete. The candle burns lower, yes. But in its final inches, it gives the softest, warmest light. That is the light you carry now. That is the gift you offer others, not answers, but presence. Not control, but grace. Not certainty, but a deep, quiet faith in the rhythm of things, that everything rises, everything falls, and everything, even aging, belongs. When the Buddha was about to pass away, he did not cry out in fear. He did not hold on. He simply said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." And then, he let go. Not into darkness, but into peace. And that, too, can be your path. Whether you believe in rebirth or not, whether you know what comes after or don't, you can still live this life in a way that death does not scare you. Because when death comes, it will only be asking one thing: did you live fully? Did you love freely? Did you awaken, even just once, to the miracle of now? And if your answer is yes, even just a whisper of yes, then you have already walked the path well. So take this breath gently. Hold your hand to your heart and say quietly, "I am still here. I am still learning. I am still opening." Let this be your final lesson. That aging, far from stealing your life, may just be handing it back to you, moment by moment, breath by breath, with nothing left to prove and everything left to feel. You are not declining. You are unfolding. And somewhere beyond the stories, beyond the age, beyond even the idea of you, there is a stillness, and in that stillness, a door, not closing, but opening. Walk through it. You're ready.